Hello, and we are back, and I've moved, which is quite impressive. But there we go. Hello, lovely to have you here. It's all for women's football, and we said it. We said it when we started. The thing we wanted to do was to shine that spotlight a little bit further than just the WSL. So we've taken a hefty hike, we've put on our backpack, and we've made it all the way to the Highlands and the Lowlands, to the Bonnie Banks, not of Loch Lomond, but of Scotland. And we are going to get right into it. So come and join us. We're going to find out about a new place. Let's go. Well, hello again. It's lovely to have you here with us. And of course, it's no point us sitting here trying to talk all about Scotland because as much as I love it and as much as I have ancestry there, I can't tell you loads and loads about these Scottish leagues, but we did go and get ourselves two people who absolutely could. One of them you might recognise. He has been around the All For brand a couple of times. That's just below us. Mr. Graham Falk, it's lovely to have you here, sir. How are you?
Really nice to be back. I genuinely mean that. How are you? You all right?
I'm loving life. Loving life. I'm always good when you're on. So it's
Same here. Sunderland won yesterday. I'm a happy man.
Who
needs more than that?
Exactly. And we're going to be fine. And by Graham's very request, an additional person who he says has got such knowledge about Scottish women's football that he will put even Graham to shame. We've got Matt here from How's Your Touch. Lovely to have you here. How you doing, sir?
Thanks, how are you?
Yes. Very good.
I'm glad I've got a glowing recommendation.
You did. A massively glowing recommendation, so no pressure at all. And of course, with us as well, just over here, we've got Laura. How are you doing today, young Laura?
I'm good, thank you. I'm looking forward to learning a lot. I think that'll be my position today.
Well, I think we're all going to be learning a lot. There's people already in the chat who are equally looking forward to it. And I suppose really that the place to begin here is just generally about the structure. So obviously there's been a women's football league since the 70s. So it's not like this is brand new to you guys either. You've definitely had the league system going on. But at the moment, 2022, I believe, it had a little bit of a restructure so that you've got taken over a bit like the WSL have really now by their own sort of company. So you've got two leagues, SWPL 1, SWPL 2, and in the Women's Premier League 1, you've got 12 teams at the minute, and in Premier League 2, you've got the 8. So very, very interesting. I had a little look through the founding groups of the leagues in 2002, and it's interesting to see that most of them don't seem to be anywhere near those top two leagues anymore. But one of them that is of course Glasgow City, which is a place that's very close to your heart, Graham. So perhaps you could just give us just a little bit of an idea of what's going on, because I was looking through the leagues. There was two teams in particular that stood out in the next league, WPL2, which was Rossvale and Gartken. And I really had to get Google out for this one because these were not names that I'm used to seeing. So there's a lot of teams there. Out of the 42 that you would see in the men's league, what's happening with the other 26? Only 16 of the teams that make up that top 20 are teams that would be well known to people that see the Scottish results. So can you tell us a little bit about how you think women's football is growing over there and why it is that we're seeing names like that in one of the top two leagues?
I think on this one, I'll pass it straight to Matt, because to be fair to Matt, without me kind of just passing it straight off, you know a bit more about the teams underneath the top tier. I'll openly admit, outside of the cup competitions, I probably don't pay, because I'm a Glasgow City fan. I look an awful lot at that, and there's a lot of foundation in Glasgow City. But I mean, Matt's probably more well rehearsed, and since this is a learning program, I'll let Matt take this one over.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt.
So I mean, you obviously mentioned the other clubs. I mean, up in Spartans, for example, have been a club in Scottish women's football that have been historically quite successful and have been around in the top tier for ages. But their men's team only got promoted into the SPFL 2-3 years ago. Something like that. I don't really keep up with the men's game that much, but I know it was recent. And yeah, so we've got quite a few teams that have managed to make names for themselves and be successful, despite not having traditionally strong men's clubs. I mean, last time I checked, everyone did have a women's team. It's just that some of them are just floating around in the really low divisions in the like regional leagues and such. You like so like Ross County, for example. It's difficult for them because I mean, there's no one there. You've not exactly got a big population to pick from. Up in Dingwall, you've got a really small population who are very spread out, and transport-wise isn't ideal either. So it is sort of difficult for them to get off the ground in sort of like a grassroots way. They obviously they could throw money at it if they wanted to, but I mean Scottish clubs don't exactly have loads of money anyway outside of the top teams. So it's sort of like if they threw money at it, they'd be severely damaging their men's team instead of like if it was a Wimbledon, well they could afford to throw some money at it and not severely damage their men's team in England. But we do have quite a sort of thriving sort of rural culture in women's football, like the Island Games just last year. The Western Isles got to the final. Were only beaten by Bermuda, who had Leilani Nesbitt, who went in the first round of the NWSL draft. Like, that's not fair. A bunch of island players, and a couple of them were playing in the second tier, one in the first tier, but no one really any good. But we have got a good sort of rural culture around it, and I think that helps for those smaller teams. And then obviously as well, like a lot of people will play for them because they're easy to get to. So like Gartcairn is still it's not a real place. It's in Airdrie, which is in between Glasgow and Stirling. So it's easy to get to for a lot of people that are working. They've got a good culture. A lot of people want to play for a team with a good culture. They have a fair bit of money, so it's not like they're they're not poor by any means. So one where it's just easier for them, I think, to get into it because they're not having to compete with the likes of like Rangers, Glasgow City, Hibs, Hearts, who are going full time. They're competing with the likes of Motherwell, and then it just becomes a case of who do you want to play for? What culture do you like more as part of that? And then financially, it's pretty similar when it comes to how much they're getting paid. So yeah, we have quite a lot of independent clubs.
That's why I said I would pass it over to Matt, because I would be like, Glasgow City really good, but
where you could go with that is the fact that out of the 20 again, there are 2 teams within those 20 that are women only. There's not a men's affiliate to that. Glasgow City obviously seems to be the main one of those. It's just a women's football team, and in the division below, you've got Boroughmuir Thistle. So, out of those 2 teams, like, what would you say it is there for your side, Glasgow City, there to have just a women's only team? Is there ever any thoughts there about expanding that out for the men as well, or do you think they're quite content there just being women's only and championing the football there?
I really hope they don't, and I don't think they will. And that's nothing against like having a men's team. I think it's just historical what they've always been, and I think. I mean, obviously I'm not part of Glasgow City, but I was for a few years up until really recently, and I know a lot about the history of the club. And I think when you look at City and the reason they were built, it was literally because there was Laura, the founder, to my knowledge, got an injury, and when she'd come back from injury, she didn't really have a club that she could go to, and all the clubs that she could have went to were like affiliated with men's clubs, and she was like, "Well, I'll just make my own club," and like the rest history, sort of, you know what I mean? And it's a really rich history. But I think touching on what Matt said before about like Spartans and stuff like that as well, you see Partick Thistle historically have been in the top tier in the past, and they're not a tiny club. They're a very well supported club with a nice stadium and a really good infrastructure. But in terms of Thistle over the past few years, they've been nowhere near the top tier, which would be a perfect excuse for Partick Thistle to say, oh, well, we don't have any money because I think they were in League One at a point not too long ago. We can't invest in the women's team, but they have one of the most, like I was at the first ever Glasgow City Partick Thistle game, which took place like 4 years ago or something like that. And Partick Thistle took the lead, and it was like, oh, hang on a minute. and you were like, they were, they've just come up. They were pretty good actually, considering they've just came up. It was 3-1. We had a battle back, and we sort of seen something in Park Thistle that they were trying to grow, and they'd built like a real family, and they kind of put the money that they had that they could put into a women's football club into that club. And you see where Thistle are now. Like, you don't see them as like plucky underdogs who might get out of relegation. They're a top 16, and it would be like the perfect opportunity for Thistle to be like, no, we can't afford it right now because we were in League One a few years ago. Like, we can't do that. I think there's a lot of the quote unquote smaller clubs, Spartans, that historically maybe haven't had like a Rangers or a Celtic, and this is no disrespect to them, but that have maybe joined Rangers and Celtic recently and saying, we're going to invest as much as we can, and we can maybe punch above our weight with this, even if the men aren't doing that well. So I think there's more probably opportunity. There's more, not more opportunity. I think there's more clubs maybe lower down the men's pyramid that are willing to go, you know what, like, why wouldn't we want a successful women's team as well? And I think Spartans historically, probably, Matt might agree with me, historically the team that's kind of done that, from teams that have like a men's team beside them. But, recently Thistle are the one. I mean, Brian Graham, striker, extraordinaire for Park Thistle men Monday to Friday. And then on the nights he trains the women's team, gets them to cup finals and everything like that. Manages them on a Sunday. And there's numerous times, because I'm sure we'll come on to it, but Park Thistle, Glasgow City and Rossville all ground share up until like really recently, when the stadium's out of action at the minute. But there'd be times when you'd see Brian Graham kind of running in on a Sunday from Park Thistle men's games, like running in to like manage the women's team, or like you'd go, oh, Park Thistle are playing in like a playoff game and Park Thistle women are also in the final. And he would always make it work. And I think that's probably a big testament to how Thistle have operated recently. Like, they make it work on what they've got, and they're really successful at it. But I don't think they're the first team to do it. I think they're the most recent example of a successful club that a success that of the team that have done that. And as Matt touched on before, Spartans are the same, but there'll be loads of other clubs like that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It sounds about right. And Laura, if we're being honest, it doesn't sound tremendously dissimilar to the WSL and the Championship and the WNL in how it's been populated and how the clubs are. You've got London City Lionesses obviously doing incredibly well in the Championship, but even here we still have Durham as well, I suppose, another good example of that. Mainly the Championship, I suppose, but even in our top two leagues, we are starting to see a very similar sort of tale here in terms of how the leagues are populated.
Yeah, definitely. I think you look at Lewis as well, and London Bees have definitely been both examples of clubs that have historically been quite successful in being women's only clubs. It's kind of, like doing the comparison earlier. I do hope that, I think Glasgow City are probably the best example of a women's only club that have done super successfully. We'll come on to their like Champions League history, but that's really rich, and I think currently the last team to have reached the quarterfinals as a women's only team, which is really cool. And it's like you want to keep that legacy going because you want that to succeed. I think that's where the kind of Michelle Kang experiment will be quite an interesting one in terms of how much we can keep that going and how much we can keep that like legacy current, I guess, because you want to see those teams in the top tiers for as long as possible and to sustain that. And it's like, I think at the moment it's how are we going to do that? And I think in Scotland we probably have one of the best examples of that at the moment. Obviously you can look elsewhere, you can look at the NWSL, which is probably kind of, but it's a whole different setup. But in a kind of league where you're looking at a lot of male dominated kind of run clubs through their men's team, it feels like Glasgow City are doing the best job of surviving and continuing that, and maybe other teams should learn off that because they've done it very, very well.
Absolutely. And Graham alluded to the grounds a moment ago, so Matt, we're going to come to you as the clear catch-all for the top two leagues with that one, because I might be entirely wrong here. I had a good go at trying to use my research skills as best as I can with the knowledge that's available. And from what I could see, again, out of the 20 teams, there's only 3 over the two leagues that seem to use the affiliate men's ground. if there is one, as their home ground. So Spartans obviously use Ainsley Park, but that's about 3,500 that you can get into that. The big ones for me were Kilmarnock and Livingston in SWPL 2, who seem to use theirs as well, 15,000 and 9,700 for them. Graham then goes on about the ground share that's happening at Petershill Park there of Partick Thistle as well, and Roswell using that as well, and even Boroughmuir are sharing with Hibernian. So as somebody who will see a lot of football regularly, would you say that the ground sizes are currently the right size for the popularity of women's football that's happening over there? Because we certainly had that over here with the Euros not necessarily being at the right size stadiums for the product as it was. Would you say it's at that sort of level? Because we've seen some excellent videos of Celtic fans, for example, specifically, just absolutely rocking the stadiums whilst they're out there. So would you say that the stadium levels at the moment are about right?
No, but also the men's ones aren't, so it's kind of like a weird thing. It goes back way ages ago in the 2000s. There was a rule the SPFL introduced where grounds had to be 10,000 seats, and it was widely, like in the top division for the men's game, and it was widely criticised, and it's been abandoned since. But it means that quite a lot of teams play in massive empty stadiums every week because they didn't have 10,000 fans when they built them. So it's sort of a problem that we've got in Scottish men's football anyway. So it's not really a thing. Aki's also playing there in their men's ground. So there's 4 off the top of my head. There might be more than that that share ground share with their men. Other Spartans don't usually get kicked out. The other 3 sometimes play elsewhere, depending on what's going on in men's football. But yeah, it's odd because I would say that like Hearts, who play at Oriam, that's too small, and it's not really adequate either in terms of facility. It's the national training centre for the national team. It's a big, impressive gym and sort of facility for sports, which I've got to say because it's at the university I went to, and I used to give tours around it, so I've got to hype it up. But it is a really impressive facility, but it's not an impressive ground. Is an impressive training pitch. I would say Meadowbank probably as well as where Hibs and Bournemouth Thistle play. Like as much as it's not necessarily being sold out every week, it's still not. There's not much room to grow there. But it's one where at least geographically it's in the centre of a city, so you can potentially see in the future that if money was invested in it, then it could be. Celtic are in the process of building a ground. No one really knows any details on how big it's going to be, or anything like that. But it's going to be as part of their new training complex, which is next to Celtic Park. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. But generally, it's a stadium size is a problem in Scotland for men's football, women's football. You see Rangers men playing at Hampden in front of 25,000. It's not ideal at times. So it's one of those. It's a bit of a weird one. I will say though, it is always funny to me when I see like Arsenal, for example, bigging themselves up about how much they're playing at the Emirates, and then it's like, well, Kelly have been doing it for ages. They've been ground sharing with their men for years. So have Aki's. It's not new for us, which is sort of an odd thing when it's obviously so celebrated elsewhere. It is something that isn't really new to the SWPL, but it is something that I would say the big events are doing quite well, but then the rest of the grounds are probably not fit for purpose. But at the same time, there aren't really grounds that would be, so it's more difficult than it would be for a Chelsea going to Kings Meadow or Arsenal going to Meadow Park, where that is a ground that existed already, was a decent size for them to grow into, and key to that is it's grass, not 4G. Whereas in Scotland, we've got a lot of 4G pitches with 10,000 seats. It's hard to grow into that. It's hard to build momentum when every week you're filling, less than 10% of the ground.
Yeah.
But the clubs are doing a decent job. Last year we saw the Old Firm. They sold out the main stand at Broadwood for the first time. and got a really good attendance, and we do see quite a lot of good attendances around even the smaller grounds, but obviously it doesn't sound very impressive when you're saying 400 people. Where at Ainsley Park doesn't sound impressive, but it is for the size of stadium and size of clubs. So
no, it seems like a reasonable point to make when you compare the stadiums with the men's sides as well. But Graham, again, Glasgow City, we've just mentioned it and how that shares about, and you're quite correct. Is fixture scheduling just as hard for you guys up there as it is for us down here sometimes? Because I mean, it's certainly in Tier 5, we don't necessarily have to share the ground so much, but it's one of those where if we try and hire out the ground and somebody else has got it, you're not necessarily going to get in. But you guys, your part, you've got about 5 teams doing it. So, as Matt says, do you find yourself having to find alternative accommodation for some games? Is it a bit of a nightmare because there's potentially so many teams sharing at the higher levels?
I mean, I'm not privy to it at the moment because of obviously I'm not being part of it. Well, I'm not part of it, but like they've currently moved the Compline Peters Hill because there's some work being done there. So at the minute it looks like that's a bit of a nightmare in itself because you've got fixtures like the Celtic game on Sunday was meant to originally be at Peters Hill, but that had to be reversed. So Celtic became the home team. And then the home fixture will be played later on. Park Thistle are playing away from home at the moment. I believe the next Glasgow City game's at K Park. But it was quite funny. I remember last year, the cup draw came out and it was, I think Park Thistle got drawn at home. And then we were like, oh, here we go, Glasgow City at home. It'll be a Glasgow City home game, Glasgow City at home. And then we were like, oh, hang on, Rossvale haven't been drawn out yet. Right, here we go. Rossvale's going at home. And Rossvale were also drawn at home. And it ended up where, like, the car park, you couldn't get in because you had, like, 11 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, like, back-to-back games. But, it was quite fun in a way. It was manageable. It was quite nice. I remember the day, particularly, you seen players coming in and out, fans from different teams coming in and out, and it felt like quite a nice day. So it wasn't as difficult as you might imagine. What I find kind of odd is when you find, well, not odd, but like when, Rangers and Celtic have done really good things by moving their games to, because I personally like it, like from a perspective of the opposition media teams, which is what I used to be. I used to like going to Ibrox. I used to like going to Celtic Park. I got to see that game with Celtic when they sold like 15,000 tickets. And yeah, I was on the opposition side, but it was like, whoa, this is different from Tuesday night. This is a little bit different, but it felt like something. And there'll have been, look, if there was 500 people in there that said, oh, I want to come back to Celtic every single week, which I'm sure there was maybe more, that's kind of what you're going for. But I remember that period of time, and I think there was also a situation last season where the games were being moved and were having to be played on Saturdays or Fridays or Sundays and stuff like that because the men's team were playing at like Ibrox or Celtic Park, and I think there was other examples as well. I'm sure there was one. Was it the Edinburgh Derby, Matt, that was played on like a Friday night because Hearts were playing there on like the Sunday or something, or Hibs were playing? What game was that again?
It won't have been the Edinburgh Derby. So the Edinburgh Derbies, they're trialling Friday night football for them to try and increase attendances. So they're still doing that, from what I know. So
a few games that shifted about, there wasn't there?
There was a game that moved, but I can't remember who it was because it was one of the big ones, like one of the big events that was being put on was moved because of a rescheduled cup tie or something. Like something happened. I can't remember what it was.
You did get like a point when there was a title race, I believe, last year when there was different games played on different days. I can't quite remember what the order of it, but in general, to kind of answer your question, Barry, it's not as difficult as it might sound. It's actually kind of manageable. But the bigger it gets, the more games I go at Ibrox, the more games I go at Celtic Park, the more games I go at Tynecastle, the more games I go at Easter Road. You can't have 2 teams playing at once. And I know you have that. I went to a Sunderland game once, and afterwards Sunderland women were playing against Birmingham. And it just didn't work. The double day thing didn't work. And I know some people would like to see that. I personally don't think it works. Like 2 games in a day is hard going. I did the relegation and the promotion playoffs like a couple of seasons ago, and that was 2 women's games back-to-back, separate teams at a neutral stadium, and that was difficult to keep my concentration for like 2 games. So I think if you're getting like a load of women's football fans, a load of men's football fans, or people who like both, back-to-back games can be quite tough. You're talking about more than extra time there. So I know some people would like to see that, but I think the bigger the game goes, you probably will get more scheduling problems because you can't play two teams on the same pitch at the same time. So it's going to be more difficult than it is at the moment. I think it's quite manageable from my experience. Even when you've got 3 teams playing at one stadium, drawn in the cup, drawn exactly the same day, all at the same ground on the same day. That was fun, actually.
It's been quite an opportunity for. It's been quite an opportunity for Glasgow City in part of this, though, because they last season post split did a sort of campaign where season ticket holders could go to the away game for free. So they sort of made it as like a bumper thing, and I thought it was quite interesting because it allowed them to, say, oh, well, we'll play Peters Hill. So it's kind of like, so whether or not that'll happen, I don't know if Partick Thistle's long-term home will be Peters Hill, but if it's going to be, then it'll be interesting if that's the future. Rossvale seem to have moved out to Kirkintilloch permanently. Not that any of you guys know where Kirkintilloch is, but
Well, I mean, you say that. There was a few things while I was trying to research this show that blew my mind. And Partick Thistle, to me, were always a team that I used to play back when I was younger with Championship Manager. I had a really good youth team. So you'd sort of go and raid them to try and get some players that were particularly good. And then when I found out that Partick Thistle was sharing with Glasgow City, I thought, why would they be going so far? This seems very odd. And it's only about 5 miles away. I'm like, when was Partick? You'd think Partick was its own little separate entity, but it's not. It's just round the corner. And that blew my mind. So Scottish geography, I thought I wasn't too bad at, but clearly with that one, lost the plot entirely.
Your Scottish geography is almost as bad as Connor's taste in films.
Well, I didn't quite go that far.
No, did anything that bad? No. Maybe it's Quiff.
Yeah, well, tell me about it. But Lauren, when you hear what these guys are saying about how the stadiums are being used, how does that make you feel in terms of, again, the English side of it? Because you look at the top 2 leagues in England, we're not looking at 2 leagues where people really have trouble with a ground share. And if they do, it's 2 clubs minimum. And therefore, the home and away games are a lot easier to schedule. So where does that kind of hit with you? What do you think Scotland could do if you know? I might be way above your wheelhouse here, but what do you think they could do in terms of trying to up it a bit? If Matt's saying they need better stadiums as well for the men as well, like why do you think it is that that's not quite managed it yet?
I guess it's just like different footballing cultures. I think we have like there's perhaps a tendency from like a WSL perspective to be like, well, everything should try and aspire to be like the WSL, or that's where we're at. We're at, like they're leaders in where women's football is or whatever. And I don't think that's necessarily true in the first place. But I also think what Matt was saying about the ground shares and about different aspects and how Scottish football overall has just developed was really interesting in terms of it just sounds different, and it doesn't feel like there's a solution in, they can learn from this or they can learn from that, because it just feels like a different culture and a different situation. I think it's just kind of, interesting. I think it was the other point was the kind of like a lot of the main stadiums are already used there by men's and women's teams alike. And I think that's quite an interesting point in terms of, I think there's a tendency to look at it in England and think, oh, well, we're moving it to like the Emirates is like this big moment and we're going to have a game there and that's huge. And it's the fact that the Emirates, and that's the kind of draw of it. But actually, if that's already been used in Scotland, but you're still seeing, for Rangers Celtic, you're seeing big crowds because that's the big event. Maybe we need to start thinking of it as actually, let's create these rivalries in women's football more and more. Let's create kind of positional rivalries as well as kind of location rivalries, because that's what's actually drawing crowds, not necessarily just moving it to a bigger stadium, which is obviously a nice thing in itself. And it's still kind of a show of progress. But I think you can learn a lot from seeing different takes on like footballing culture and how those different things have grown, because actually that's suggesting that the big stadium's not necessarily the appeal, it's actually the occasion and the match and the actual football that's on show. And that's quite an interesting thing to take away from that, I thought.
No, absolutely. I think you're spot on. And I'm actually going to go to Graham for this one to start with, purely
Oh,
because
no.
it goes mostly around Glasgow City, to be fair. I mean, again, when I look down at the notes that I've put on for here, I've literally written in the same thing that I sent to the pair of you. Why are Glasgow City the GOATs with 16 league titles? Like this, again, this was one of the things that blew my mind, because you would imagine you're looking at your Hearts, your Hibernians, your Rangers, your Celtics. To hear that Glasgow City have won 16 championships, 9 women's cups, and then you look at the likes of the rest of them that are trailing in your wake. Hibernian have only won the title since 2002 3 times. The runners up 9 times. Won the Women's Cup 8 times. Again, that's Hibernian, which again isn't necessarily the most celebrated of Scottish teams of the recent 20, 30 year period. Celtic have only won it once. Rangers have only won it once. They've been runners up a few times and a little bit better in the Women's Cup. So what is it that Glasgow City are doing and have done? You mentioned about, this one person who's just gone, I've not got a club, I'll just make one. And as a story goes, that's pretty amazing. But she didn't just make one. Like, to quote almost another just Scottish footballing icon, they've basically done what Alex Ferguson did. She's built an empire that is really just unbelievable. It's dominated over 2 decades, which is just unbelievable, really. So can you tell us a bit more about what it is that they've done that's made them so formidable?
I think so when I first volunteered to be part of Glasgow City's media team, I watched a documentary called The Women Who Built Glasgow City, which is about Laura and Cass, who were the original founders. And that will tell you more than like anyone can ever tell you, really. It's a really good documentary, and it really does make you understand about City. I think from an outside looking in, I wasn't there at the start, but I think there's a lot of determination there to get it done right. That's kind of remained throughout from the original founders. Of course, things have changed. It's not kind of, the league's not the way it was. But I think the more they had a dream. I didn't mean to say that, but I have said it now, where they wanted Glasgow City not just to be a women's team, they wanted it to be successful as well. And they were quite forthright in making sure they did that. They managed to do it. Determination gets you a long way. I think at that time as well, you were probably able to. No offense to the league at the time, but it was smaller then, much smaller. You probably have much more of an opportunity to do what they did then, but they had the determination to get it sort of across the board. Once you start getting successful, especially if you're a women's footballer and you see this club that's going we don't need a men's club, we're doing it. Look, I'm not a woman, but I imagine that's so attractive. That must be so attractive if you're you know what, just won the league, not want to play here. Look at all these trophies we've got. I mean, I spoke to captain of Rangers, Nicola Doherty. I spoke to her about her whole career about 3 years ago. And we covered over the Glasgow City part because she is a Rangers fan. She's Rangers through and through. She's Mrs. Rangers. She's won every domestic trophy with Rangers now, and I'm sure she's delighted to have done it. But she won a lot with Glasgow City. But she originally left Rangers when she was sort of younger, and we spoke to her about why did she go to City? And she says, somebody turned up and was look, this is a women's only club, and opened the suitcase and showed them all the medals that they'd won in the past couple of years and went, do you want to win trophies? And imagine being told you can win all of this. It's a women's only club, and look at all the people that's been through the club. And I just think gradually they made it bigger and better. What they've kind of inadvertently, maybe accidentally done is created competition. That is really strong. People are starting to want a bit of that success that Glasgow City's had. And, if you look over the last, I think last 3 seasons, Glasgow City have won a title, but they haven't won any of the domestic trophies. They've been beaten to a title twice, where previously they'd won 14. And that's not because Glasgow City got bad overnight. Far from it. People started going, right, we're going to go professional and we're going to win the league. Celtic did it. Rangers did it. Hearts are getting there. Hearts top of the league at the moment as we speak. Sorry, Matt. Hibs have been going professional, and on top of that, not professional, semi-pro, but I think they'll push on. Aberdeen have done the same with semi-pro. There's teams that are now probably looking at Glasgow City and being oh, well, why can't we do that? Which is kind of maybe inadvertently create the competition that is stronger than they've ever had previously, which I'm sure in a way if you're making that club at the start and someone says, right, in I think it's 26 years City are coming up to being a club, someone said in 26 years time you're gonna like actually have to really battle for the title because you've got like 2 fully professional clubs alongside you who are now professional, and then you've got a couple of like like mainly professional clubs. Well, I don't like saying semi-pro, it just sounds like a dirty word, doesn't it? It's not, but like not all of the players are professional, but a lot are. And they're going to be like chasing you, and they might actually take some points off you, and you're not just going to win the league easily. You'd probably take it from a perspective of like, but then that makes Glasgow City want to like improve and get better. I mean, Lisa Evans signed for Glasgow City this summer. That's massive. Like, can you ever imagine Bayern Munich and Arsenal's like Lisa Evans moving back to Scotland at like a really, really good age because the league has grown so much? Katie Wilkinson's gone to Rangers, top scorer in Championship history, I believe. So I think they've had that real successful, we're going to do it. The determination was what got them there. I think then that becomes really attractive, especially as a women's footballer. You then start to build the history. Then you start going, well, hang on. I mean, people that have played at Petershill Park is like ridiculous. There's me and another former member of the media team who left in the summer, Craig. He's going away to America. And he stays at mine all the time. We go for beers. He's from Dunfermline, and he used to drive down for every game because he couldn't get rid of it. Of that kind of love for City, he just couldn't stop doing it. And we'll sit and watch like old Champions League games. Now, like we were watching one before, and we were like, "Oh, put the Barcelona game on," and the team lineup comes up, and it's like Bon Marty on the bench at Petershill, Alexia Putellas like in midfield, Matty Leon there, and then you're like, "Oh, put the Wolfsburg game on," and you've got like, and in a sense, like. Look, I know at that time they maybe weren't known as well as they are now, but if you're a women's football and you think, right, if I go to Glasgow City, I could maybe play in the Champions League quarterfinals or last 16 against Pernilla Harder, I could play against Bon Marty, I could play against Alex Scott, Arsenal played there as well. I think that's really helped them on their way. Like, I watched the game before I even knew Glasgow City were, because I lived back home, or I was just moved up to Scotland, I think. And it was Arsenal, and it was like Steph Houghton, Alex Scott, players like that, like in the team at the time. And it looks packed. I was like, Petersill's rammed. I was like, I haven't seen like that like for a while. And that was because people wanted to go down because they knew these Arsenal players, and they'll know the women's players play for Glasgow City, and then all of a sudden they can get like the best Scottish players. But they've created not just a kind of a dynasty for themselves, they've created competition in Scotland for me personally. People might disagree, but that's what I think. I just think when it comes to City, the thing they maybe have the advantage of to other people, like I'll openly admit, like every single person, like women's player, every single player that's come through that team that's left, that is still there, like I have so much respect and time for. And like I left 3 months ago and I miss just about every single one of them daily, apart from a couple of them who I still speak to on a regular basis and go for coffees with. I don't get the chance to miss them really, but that's because City feels like a family. And I think one thing that now I can speak from a non-biased side, potentially one thing that they maybe mustn't lose sight of is that like that's what probably made them more successful in anything at the start, is that people wanted to be part of that, not just for success, but because of who they were and the morals that they held. They'll never lose those morals because they're built on it. But the people like within that club, both players, staff, and then outside of that, people who love Glasgow City are the people that need to be nurtured and looked after always, I think. And as long as they keep that in mind, that like everyone's as important as everyone else, which I'm sure they will, and that Glasgow City is a real family, I don't think you can kind of knock that success, because we all know what it's like, don't we? When you have a football club that you love more than anything, you pretty much put your life on the line for them, rightly or wrongly. We've all got that. And I think City's really good at creating that sort of family, and this is my club and I'm never going to move from it. Like I'll never be able to not support Glasgow City. As long as they continue to fester that environment and look after the people within it, as they should, which any club should. And I don't see them ever not being relevant. Just more competitiveness and more challenge than ever before, which has been created by them, in my opinion.
Honestly, just listening to the pair of you speak is brilliant, because it's exactly why we want this type of show on the channel. Because Laura, myself, Connor, we could have all sat here and had a chat about the SWPL, but we wouldn't have got this. We wouldn't have got the sort of the behind the scenes, in-depth knowledge. We'd have just gone, oh yeah, did you not know that Glasgow City won it 16 times? We wouldn't get all of that stuff from the back. So that's superb. Sort of progressing that slightly, Matt. Graham's alluded to it, but post-COVID, I think you had about £437,000 put into maintaining Scottish football because there was a bit of a worry that it might not come back as strong as it could do, which, from what I see, is the biggest investment in Scottish women's football to date. But since then, Glasgow City have won a couple of leagues, but Rangers and Celtic have won one. When you get to the Cup, obviously, Celtic won a couple and Rangers have won one. They're starting to creep in, Celtic and Rangers. We know they've dominated Scottish football in the men's side for a long time. They're starting to creep in. And at the same time, we had this swap over in 2022 with the leadership. And the league has been 12 in the first division and then 8 in the second division. This season is a transitional one. So ordinarily, we're going to get to the split in a bit, but the bottom team would be relegated and the side that's just above bottom would then play off against the team that was second in the second division to decide which one of them gets to either go up or stay down. They've changed that this season, haven't they? It's going to be a transitional year. So they're going to make it so there's 10 teams in both leagues. So 3 will get relegated this year. Only one's going to get promoted and there's no playoff. Why do you think they've made that decision now? Why didn't they just go 10 and 10? Why have they gone 12 and then 8? And only now, a couple of years later, decided to do this transition?
Well, okay. The official reason is because of the new European competition. The clubs at the top, obviously, scheduling is difficult, and we play more games than anyone else in Europe, which I think is something to be proud of. But some people potentially don't, because there's always the schedule worries over injuries and such. Although, I mean, I would always counter it with, like, I don't understand how you can really have a league that you can talk about as being a competitive event if the top scorer is ending with like 12 goals, or if they're scoring a goal a game to get 20. I always feel like that's a bit mental. So I personally don't think it's something that we should be proud of. And we've only cut 2 games, so at the end of the day, it's kind of a bit pointless. It's not something that I'm a fan of. It's not something that many people are a fan of, especially not people that outside of maybe the top 3. But essentially, it's because of the European games and because of the international schedule being so crazy. Because the international schedule is crazy. And then they've wanted to do is cut the games down to be a bit cynical. It's kind of just something that makes the big teams safer, which is a depressing way of looking at things. Because after the change when it's 10 and 10, we're going to have a split of 6 and 4. So of the bottom 4, 2 of those are going to be threatened with relegation. So half of the league, half of the bottom 4 every season, which is obviously nuts. And then you could go even further and be even more cynical and go, well, maybe they don't want the likes of Spartans in the league if they could have the likes of Kilmarnock, who are bigger men's teams. So there's that. Honestly, genuinely, the reasoning for it, I don't love. It's something that we wrote about when it happened. We were quite critical of it because it did come it didn't come out of nowhere, but it did come as a bit of a shock that they were going to do it, because if anything, we were at a point where we could have expanded the league again, and potentially done something a bit more ambitious. But then this season's happened, and the first couple of weeks have happened, and I'm starting to get a bit more on board, because I do think that part of their reasoning has been to get more competitive football. And at some point, you have to look at the clubs that are getting beat 11-0 and say, you can't be at this level because you're not willing to be at this level. You're not going to do enough to be at this level. So I think part of it is just to try and get those games to stop happening, because it doesn't do good for anyone. It makes the game look like a joke. So we've sort of got, it's one where I'm sure by the end of the season I'll probably be sort of on board with it. This season I don't like how they're doing it, because they're relegating 3 teams of a bottom 6. So straight relegation for half of the bottom six. That's really tough. Because at least one team's going to end up in that three that doesn't deserve to be there, that ends up in there just by luck, by bad luck. And also the fact they didn't have a playoff, I also think is disappointing, because it means that instead of the usual champions go up, second place get a chance to go up in SWPL 2. Second place aren't getting that chance in it this season. I don't think that's fair, because it's something I've spoken to a few coaches about, a few players about. Let's be real, if second place could beat the team that finished 9th in SWPL 1, the team that finished 9th in SWPL 1 don't deserve to be in the league if they get beat by second place in the second division. So why not keep the playoff? Likelihood is it's going to be a 4 or 5-0 thrashing. It'll be fairly comfortable for the top tier side, but they still deserve the chance to go up. I do, while I'm ranting, just want to correct Graham, and this is why me being a Hibs fan's good, because it's a common myth that Glasgow City had it easy and were unchallenged for their entire time, and that is just not true. There was one season where Hibs and Glasgow City,
in cups specifically,
Hibs and Glasgow City went unbeaten until like the 4th last game of the season, where Glasgow City beat Hibs and then Glasgow City won the league. And Hibs have won as many cups combined as Glasgow City in that time. So just wanted to put on the record that to be fair, when Glasgow City were winning all those league titles, they weren't winning the cups.
What Matt's saying is totally right with Hibs, because all the players that could list for City, you could list the Caroline Weir, Joelle Murray, the ones that have stayed in Scotland, ones that have gone on, Kirsty Smith. Like, there's so many players that have kind of came to both clubs. But there was a period of time, Matt, where it would be like City would win the league, then we would play Hibs in the cup, and we would lose in the cup final, and Hibs would get the domestic cups. There was a brilliant final just before I joined, which was 4-3, which was like the one random game that City managed to win against Hibs. But the interesting and almost eerie thing is that it's continued in the cups. Like, Hibs, during my time, knocked City out of the cup at the semi-final stage. Not last season, but season before. And then last season, we got knocked out in the, remind me here, 4th round. So Hibs seem to have this thing where they can just beat Glasgow City in the cups, historically and also in modern day. I'm not entirely sure how and why it happened, but it was basically, I think on paper, because you look at titles in terms of like league titles, admittedly, I do that as a fan. City looked very dominant, but like, to be fair, it was like Hibs could lose one game and that would be it. And it could be against Glasgow City.
And it was the same as well in the early years. I also want to give credit to Kilmarnock, because they're the third most winningest side in Scottish women's football, which is funny because it's Kilmarnock and they're in the second tier now. But they also were like the same in the early years of Glasgow City winning the title. They would lose like 2 games in a season, and it was like, shame.
Kilmarnock was definitely one of the teams that
Graham's bias.
The Kilmarnock one was definitely one that came up. There was also, I think, just before the millennium, you had Cumbernauld FC, which then turned into Stenhousemuir. So they had a nice little period of domination for a couple of years as well. I hope I did mention that about Hibs, but just to be sure, just in case people didn't think it did, Glasgow City did win the league 16 times, but Hibs won it 3. They were runners-up 9 times, whereas Glasgow City were runners-up 3 times, and Glasgow City won the Women's Cup 9 times, and Hibs 8. So, yes, absolutely, Hibs are well up there too with that one. Laura, with regards to coming to you with this one, there was kind of 2 bits that I wanted to pick up on, but I have forgotten the first one. So whilst I'm remembering that first bit, can I just get you to talk about the second bit, which was going to be the bit about audio description, because you found quite an interesting little factoid as you were doing some research for the show.
Yeah, I actually spoke to Jonathan Brewer a bit ago just about accessibility in football generally, and he's doing a really cool thing where he's visiting all SPFL, I think 42 grounds in Scotland with his guide dog, so that his guide dog's going to be the first guide dog to go to do the 42 in Scotland, which is just a cool thing in itself. But he mentioned that Celtic women were the first ever women's side to do fully audio described matches at their home ground, which is just a really cool thing, I think, because more and more we talk about like accessibility in football, and we talk about like women's football being accessible for the pricing for various different reasons, not being accessible because obviously I think like public transport can be harder to women's football, some of the women's football grounds generally. So there's different things, but I think the fact that it's previously, I think you see it a lot in the men's games because the bigger stadiums have those facilities, they have more investment, but you don't necessarily see it because women's grounds tend to be at kind of non-league, don't have that investment, don't have the facilities, whereas Celtic, even at the grounds that's not necessarily the main stadium, Celtic Park, they're putting that in place and they're making sure that anyone can kind of come along and watch their games and enjoy it in the same way that they'd want to anywhere. And that was before anyone did it in the WSL, and I think there's still a lot of catching up to do for many clubs, Scotland, England, I'm sure everywhere else as well.
Just a little thing to think about, isn't it?
Some of the referees stick it in their ears so they can get commentary of what's actually happening in the game. That'd be quite. I have remembered the second bit, Laura. It was about the number of games, as Matt was talking about there, because he was spot on. So it's 32 games that are played within a season there. Now, you look at what we do in England, you've got 22 games being played, then that's it. And we whinge about this. We moan, there's not enough games in the WSL. So we're going to get onto the split in just a second. But I was just wondering your thoughts on what Matt mentioned there about the number of games, because if I've got my maths correct, it will go from 32 to 28. Would that be right? Because you'd have 9 teams playing twice and then there's a split. So it's around about that sort of level. But yeah, talk to me. Do you think the numbers of games should be as high as they are? Because I'd love 32 games in a WSL season. Don't know about you.
Yeah, I in my notes it says love it. Next to that little point, I think I do really like it. It's really hard because you kind of think, you look at the scheduling of women's football and you see that there are crazy kind of international breaks. And I think at the very, very top of women's football, where you're in your national side, you're playing Champions League football, you're doing all these different things, I think there's a scheduling problem. But it feels like for most of the women's teams, there isn't, or there is, but it's more the lack of games. And actually, I'd love to see 32 games as a fan across that season. You want your players to be protected, and I want that just as much as anyone else. But as a fan perspective, if you can work that out, and they've done it in the men's game, so I would love to see that amount of games across the season. And I think that's the part of the league split that really appealed to me, in terms of let's fit as much football in. Let's not have kind of huge periods without football. Let's have a full season, because it feels like you can get behind something a little bit more and you get more of the nuances of title races and different bits. It doesn't feel like it's necessarily, and I know the split makes that a little bit different, but it doesn't make it necessarily decided on 1 or 2 losses here and there where you're really demoralised as a fan just because your team's lost one match. So yeah, I'm all for that.
Well, the only other way to get 32 games in a season is to have 17 teams in a league. So that doesn't seem likely to happen in either up north or down south at this moment in time, Graham. But I'd like you to talk to us about the split, because the split's been existent in Scotland for as long as I can remember. It's always been the case in the men's leagues as well. Now, I had a little look at last year, because I found last year quite interesting. So before the split, Rangers were top of the league after the 22 games, and they were 4 points clear of Celtic. And then by the end of the split, having had the extra 10 games, Celtic won it on goal difference, 13 better off than any of the other teams around them. So do you think the split worked, basically? Is it the right thing to do? And could you see that being implemented in England as well?
First and foremost, I think from a perspective of the split, so it got introduced in Scotland, in the women's leagues, Matt, 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
It's come and gone. It was ages ago there was a split, then they stopped having a split, and then it was when the SWPL took over. So that was two seasons ago now, I think.
I think it was
the first one, Celtic the second. This is the third.
Yeah, that's right. So the first season I did at City was normal league, no split. And you hit March and you started going, well, we need to win this, and this, or they need to lose that. and you're kind of like, oh, okay. And the next season, it's funny you mentioned the season last season, because technically it was tighter because it was goal difference. But the season beforehand had 3 teams on the final day that could win the title. But the split was really interesting that year. So heading into the split, I could be wrong on points with this, but it was give or take. Glasgow City was 7 or 8 points clear at the top, or maybe it was between 5 and 8. You feel pretty comfortable with that in a usual normal situation. You think, right, we've got 2, 3 maximum really big games against teams that, you know, have potential to take points off us. And Celtic would have felt the same last year. Rangers would have felt the same last year as well. Then the split came along and we went, one of the games was in the cup, but we lost against Celtic at home 4-2. Really random game where we should have been 3-0 up in 10 minutes and then ended up being 2-0 down after half an hour and then got one back and then looked like we were going to get it back. Then they missed 2 penalties. So it was one of the first games of the split. I think it was the third game of the split. It was really entertaining, but it ended up where you went, okay, we've dropped 3 points there. They've clawed a little bit back. And then you look at the table and you go, we've got Rangers at home on Wednesday night. Now, Rangers at home, I've got to be honest with you. I'm going to give you a bit of PTSD here. One of my least favourite nights as a Glasgow City fan. We played Rangers and you thought, if we get a draw, we're going to be in a very commanding position. Despite the fact that we've got to play Celtic and Rangers, we could arguably, from a fan's perspective, lose both those games. And with a draw, I think 7 points we were ahead at the time, we would still be fine. So you felt kind of okay. You thought Hibs and Hearts are tough games. You would hope you could get through them. Same with Park Thistle, all tough games. You were looking at these kind of big 3 games. Now, in reality, if that was a normal league, you would have lost. We ended up losing against Rangers. This is the moral of the story. We lost in the 94th minute after equalising in the 87th, and my world crumbled for like 2 or 3 days. As it was, if that was a normal league, you'd go, well, just win the rest of your games against teams that you, quote unquote, would normally have beaten that season, and you still win the league. It's all right. Because we lost, suddenly you were like, oh, God, we're down to like 5 points or 6 points. They can catch us up just by losing those 2 games. And it came down to, we played Celtic away at Celtic Park and we were 1-0 up at half time and you thought, brilliant, title more or less there, fantastic. Celtic came out second half and I don't know what happened. We got beat 3-1 and it was amazing for everyone else to see. As a Glasgow City fan that night, it was potentially the worst night I've ever had being a City fan. But from the outside looking in, it made everything so exciting. Because it meant going into the last game of the season, City were 2 points clear. So City win the league. City are playing Rangers away at Ibrox. Rangers win, they've got a chance to win the league. But if I remember correctly, Rangers were also capable of winning the league because they were a point behind. So they beat Glasgow City and Celtic don't win their final game. They were playing Hearts, who'd actually taken 2 points off Rangers that season. You suddenly went, well, hang on a minute. Like, this could be anyone's. And going in as a fan, as a member of the media team that day, you didn't know what the heck you were going to get. As it was amazing. And I got so drunk that night, it was unbelievable. Because we won in the 92nd minute and I had the best night of my life. But I was literally having to have like deep breathing on the pitch at halftime because I was so nervous as a fan. And then you're trying to produce content at the same time. I remember, you can see the goal. Lauren scores the goal in the 92nd minute. You think, brilliant, we've won the league. There was 3 minutes after that where there was a disallowed goal, 4 shots on target, it was just mental. From a Glasgow City perspective, it made it amazing. I'm sure Celtic and Rangers would have gone, I don't really agree with you there, Graham. That was an awful day. But from a neutral perspective, looking at it, it was such a good end to the season. And that doesn't happen without the split. The same with last season. Now, that didn't involve me directly because we finished 3rd, but let's not talk about that. Rangers and Celtic going into the last game of the season, like, level on points, big goal difference. Celtic win, okay. And I'm sure Matt won't like me saying this, but I think a lot of Celtic fans went in thinking we'd win that game. It'll be all right. Hibs won't get near us. Hibs were outstanding on the day. We had Hearts at home. We went 2-0 up in like 6 minutes. So you went, let's see how Celtic get. Let's see who wins the title, sort of thing. From like our perspective, sitting down, it was a lovely sunny day, and it went on and on. And people going, Hibs are playing really well. Hibs are not just defending here; they might actually win this. And then Rangers have won. Like they were like 4-0 up against Partick Thistle, and you think, could this happen again? And then it comes through that like Amy Gallagher scores in like the 90th minute, and Celtic win it. And like, whatever your persuasion, be it Glasgow City, be it like Rangers, be it Celtic, be whoever it may be, the last 3 seasons, I've had 3 different winners in the last 2 seasons where they've had the split have been won in the final minute or injury time. Like, I mean, we all seen what happened with like the final few weeks of the WSL and how everyone said that was so exciting. If you think that's exciting, like the SWPL will literally, like, no offense to the WSL, but like poop all over it. It's far more exciting towards the end. And, you know, the proof's in the pudding. The last 2 seasons have been like literally last minute title wins. Just absolutely mad. And that's because of the split. The split's brilliant. Like, the split should be a thing permanently, everywhere, constantly. Love it.
It's an interesting view. Would you go with that, Matt? Do you agree?
Yeah, no, split's great. I do think it's one of those things that just makes Scottish football kind of special. I don't know if it could even be replicated anywhere else, even if they did introduce a split in WSL, because it is just so nuts. Like, I mean, as Graham was saying about the Celtic Hibs game, like, we were the better team. Genuinely, we were the better team on the last day of the season for no reason other than the fact that we could have come 4th, I think, potentially, but I don't know if we could. Jordan Bokum hit the post when she'd been scoring all season from those situations, and then the last day of the season she forgot to score, which was a shame. But yeah, and it's not even a direct result of the split, but it is interesting that it's happened since the split was reintroduced. We've also had Partick Thistle and Hearts get to their first ever cup finals since the split was introduced, which I don't know if that is something that is because maybe the big teams are having to deal with the fact that they are in an actual title race and they're not 15 points clear by January. But when it comes to those big finals, we've had Partick Thistle in the SWPL Cup final where they actually gave Rangers a really good game, and it was quite interesting because Joe Potter was a wee bit rattled, I think. Or not, was it Joe Potter then? I can never remember.
What, the Thistle game?
The Thistle one, yeah.
Yeah, it was, because Rachel Donaldson scored like goal of the season.
Yeah, because the season before.
I'm not even a Thistle fan. I celebrated it in Tesco in Inverness.
I was in the media bit and I was struggling not to celebrate it.
Great goal.
The guise of being professional. And then Hearts in the Scottish Cup final, who they didn't look great on the day, but they got there, which is, you know, something that you don't see very often in other leagues outside of Scotland. You don't see teams get into their first cup final regularly. Like, that's not a thing. It might happen once every couple of years, but not, especially not when they're teams that are, you know, 4th, 5th, 6th in the table. So yeah, I love the split, and I do think as well, like, it adds a bit of legitimacy to the league to make it so many games. Because as I said before, I do feel like it's a little bit. I don't know, if you were just glancing at the top scorers in the league and you saw that the top scorer had like 12 goals, or you saw that they'd scored a goal a game and they were at 20, you would be a little bit like, oh, that's not the most professional thing I've ever seen in my life. That's not like a serious footballing league. Because as football fans, you all grow up going, you need a 20-goal season striker. But you also grow up knowing that a goal a game is unrealistic and not something you should be thinking of. So it's interesting. And it's good for the bottom teams as well, because we saw last season Bailey Hutchison finished top scorer of the league. She scored 27, I think. Got a move to Hearts, so she got a move to go play full-time football. But also, like, it gives them a chance to end the season on a happy note. We had Spartans the other year, who ended the season unbeaten post-split. And it just means you can end it on a wee bit of a happier note than, you know, we lost 8-0 against Glasgow City, and then we beat Motherwell 1-0, and then we lost 8-0 against Hibs. Like, that's a little bit more. It's hard to sell to fans to come back the next season if that's how you ended it.
No, you're right. It's me.
I agree with Matt in the bottom half of the league there. Like, it is really good. Like, because those games become really competitive as well. Look, you would love the 11-0 never to happen. The reality is, even if you get that down a bit, you're probably going to have, in every league in the world, the top 3 teams beating the bottom 3 teams convincingly. When you get the split, everyone has a challenge, like absolutely everyone. And it's great because that does, as Matt said before, it improves the lesser teams because you see them having a challenge. Like in the split, I can speak maybe now from like an outside perspective of previously being inside. You'd look at the games and you'd kind of go, shit. Like, Hearts away is really hard. Hibs always do something against us. Celtic away, yeah, rough. You never look at and you think Thistle, they'll always give you a game. And the bottom half will feel exactly the same. Would I like at the time, and even now as a fan, Glasgow City to win every game 10-0? Yeah, of course I would. That wouldn't be good for the game. It would be useless, completely pointless. But as a fan, of course I would. Like, who wouldn't? But like, when I watched the WSL up until like the last 2 games of the season or whatever, as much as I admire Chelsea under Emma Hayes, it become really boring. Really boring. Like, I was like, oh, Chelsea have won again because Sam Kerr is completely inevitable. Oh, Chelsea have won again because they've just got the best squad. I really, really wanted, and I've got no animosity against Chelsea. I've got no massive love towards Man City. I'm a Glasgow City fan. And a Sunderland fan is my men's team. So, like, I don't care really who wins in WSL, but it became like I wanted City to win it, or even Arsenal, or like I wanted like United to do it the other year because it was like, well, that's something different. The SWPL, like Spartans had a brilliant time, like 2 years ago. The league last year, you see teams like suddenly having a bad run of form and then propping that sort of top half up, and it becomes a little mini league. And 3 different teams have won the league the past 3 seasons. This season, who's going to win the league is really interesting because you cannot really call it. Like, City have had a big turnover of players. Celtic have just won their first title. That's a big thing for them because, like, look, when they've narrowly missed out in the past, it's tough for them to watch. Rangers had an invincible season in their first title and then finished 3rd.
Wow.
So it's like, and this is all when the split's been introduced, and I just think like it does make it more exciting. It's really not good on the heart. Like, from a media and fan perspective, get rid of it. I don't want it anymore. I don't like it. It's tough, and it makes me sad sometimes. From a fan perspective, it's going to go to the game, and it's how many exciting things have me and Matt discussed there at both ends of the split, which kind of we've upped an ante a bit in passion talking about the split, haven't we? You can see it. Like, we're secretly big split fans.
Honestly, though, Laura, they're selling it to me. And when you think about the WSL, genuinely what a difference that would make. You know, you get to the under 22 games, and as they say, if you've got Chelsea taking on, I don't know, Reading the other year, you know that Chelsea are likely to beat Reading. It's unlikely that Reading are going to pull themselves out of the relegation zone by bopping Chelsea. But by the same token, if you were to know that, all right, we are going to split it, and now they've got to play against the teams that are lower down, and there's that playoff potential as well, that a second team in the Championship could make it up to the WSL if they can, you know, the jeopardy in that match, that to me is much better than any playoff final than you get for these promotions in the England Men's League. I think for me, this would be a real test, because you would know that the team that's coming up has the capability to hang with the big dogs in the fight there, because they've just beaten one of them.
Yeah, I feel completely sold. I've always been a bit skeptical, probably more just because I've not really seen it. I've not watched a lot of leagues that have a split in them. So I know what I know, and I've stuck with that. But I've been fully convinced, because I do think, that being said, I Reading might have given it a better go than losing 6-0 to Chelsea on the final day. But no, only joking on that one. I think
you see what you two have done. You have your little bicker in there, and then that's it. She's straight in on me, and I've been nothing but pleasant this evening.
I think I think anything that makes it more exciting and more winners, because I think we're all in the same boat. Unless you're a Chelsea fan, you want to see exactly what Graham was saying. You want to see a different winner, and regardless of who that is almost. I'm an Arsenal fan, and even I wanted City to win by the end of last season, despite feeling like they were a rival, because it was just like anyone but Chelsea at this point. And I mean, Arsenal and Chelsea probably also rivals. But I do think, City and Chelsea were top, but Arsenal had beaten them. Arsenal beating Chelsea once, beating City twice, and if you get more of those games, you're going to see more different results happening. And I'm kind of just repeating what's been said, but it absolutely sounds way more exciting from that perspective. And I like the idea of having more promotion and relegations, because I think it also, even the potential of it, and I'm always a bit skeptical about playoff matches, because it's always very much like, it does feel like in a one-off match you might not get the right result. But is that really a thing? Like, is there a right result in football? So I think adding more jeopardy into anything is really exciting, and I think it would stop the complacency of teams like West Ham, who can kind of hover around in 11th and not need to concern themselves too much with doing particularly well, because they know there's been a promoted team that is going to struggle in their first season. But if you've got two teams going down, then that's going to be, or potentially two teams going down, that's going to add that little bit of jeopardy that just... adds a bit more excitement, and the kind of ante goes up in the leagues, which, listening to these two, I love a bit of that.
It's brilliant, isn't it? It really sounds good. We're nearing the end. I'm down to my last question in a bit. So that's really, we've got to start looking at this season. So I've waited all show to be able to reveal this, but I do have a Scottish side. I've had a Scottish side for decades, actually. Due to the fact that, as I said right at the beginning, I've got some Scottish ancestry. My granddad was Scottish, and so naturally I was really looking forward to finding out some of the history of this women's team. So we're going to see what sort of reaction I get when I hold this cup just up here. That's the
manager's just quit.
Do you know what I mean? The mighty Aberdeen, who are sitting rock bottom at the moment of the SWPL. And Matt, I'll come to you on this one, because it's been a crazy couple of weeks already. Hearts and Rangers are at top of the table with a goal difference of plus 15 already. Aberdeen are sitting at the bottom with minus 18. Celtic are there with Hibs and Motherwell. They've won both of their first games. I'm not going to ask you to go in depth about this season as it is now. There's just two questions I've got for you on this one. One, who do you think is going to win it this season, and who should we look out for? Because, again, you talk about looking at the goal scoring ratios. Katie Wilkinson is 2 games in and she's on 7 goals already. She scored 4 the first week and 3 the following week. So she's certainly bossed the first couple of weeks. But it's simply, who's going to win? Who do you think might be the unlucky 3 that get relegated? And can you talk to us a little bit more as well about this horrific incident that's happened in the Rangers Partick Thistle match, where it's been going around on social media about the manager not being happy about there not being an ambulance available. And it seems to have split a little bit of an opinion, because there are people talking about there's lots of people having to wait for ambulances across Britain as we speak now. But in the men's game, you would have medical staff and more often than not an ambulance there ready and waiting. So if you could just take me down those two little bits in just a couple of minutes, that would be superb. Thank you.
I'll put on the ambulance because it's more depressing. So there wouldn't be an ambulance for the men's game. We've got an article coming out about it tomorrow. We've gone through all the regulations. The women's, the SWPL ambulance provision is in line with the SPFL, so it's the exact same. There doesn't have to be one at a men's game, there doesn't have to be one at a women's game. There has to be medical professionals on hand. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but it's in the article the specific qualification they have to have. Rangers have actually gone above and beyond what they needed to provide at the game, and it's complex because there would be an ambulance at a lot of men's games because a lot of men's teams choose to. There is also a provision that is a government provision, not a league decision, that says that if a sports ground is going to have more than 5,000 people at it, it needs to have an ambulance. But that's obviously more to do with the safety of fans and its players. At the end of the day, I can understand that Brian Graham is obviously unhappy after the game. It's an emotional moment, especially if you've had a player go through something like that. We had it last season as well. We had Becky Galbraith. She unfortunately sprained her neck as well as being concussed, and it was a similar sort of thing. In that game, the medical provision wasn't necessarily as good as it could be, where in this one it was. And it's just one of those difficult things. I mean, I don't have the expert knowledge to know what happened, with the player, with the decisions made at the ground and in the NHS dispatch and such. But looking at it purely from a pragmatic point of view, it's a player that is conscious and stable, that is surrounded by medical professionals. At what point, at that point, it's kind of like, well, there are other priorities for that ambulance. Like, they've got other things to do. It's really difficult, especially with with the NHS and the situation that we're in currently, just as a country. So it makes it a really complicated thing because do we want clubs paying? Like, do we want to say that every club has to pay for an ambulance? That's the WSL has that. That's what the situation is there. But if we're saying that, then that is only the WSL. The Championship doesn't do that in England. And in fact, looking at the regulations, it looks like Scotland's regulations are actually stronger than the Women's Championship in England. So does that mean that the Championship is putting players at risk, or is it just the sensible thing to say that you need to have a doctor, you need to have physios, you need to have sports scientists and such? But at some point, you're going a bit overboard and you're saying, let's get an ambulance out to sit there for 90 minutes, or probably longer, 120 minutes, that could then be serving the community in a better, more effective role. Especially if you're only saying that there's 200 to 1,000 people in the stand. That's not an effective use of their time. So it's a complex one. I say we've got to talk about tomorrow, because I do think that some of it has been a little bit sensationalized, just because it does sound really bad. But I do think that a little bit of it. I think Brian Green probably woken up today, probably feeling like he's regretting a wee bit how hard he went on the league, because it was, I think, just a lot of emotion from him, and he's an emotional guy. So yeah, it's a complex issue that is bigger than you've got to put an ambulance every game, because that's £300 to £1,000. The grand being on the more rural side of things. So then you're punishing teams that are smaller and they're in more rural areas, and then you start to have too many costs on those part-time teams, and those on those smaller teams, or independent teams. So that's more difficult. On the teams in the league, we have an article already out that lists every team and why you should support them. So all 20 SWPL teams. So if anyone doesn't have a team like you, I would maybe recommend not choosing Aberdeen after not just the weekend, but the weekend before. The fact
it is what it is. You can't change.
Well, Colin Bell has just ran away, so he's
How
decided he's not.
2 weeks?
Yeah, he's lasted 2 weeks potentially. He's 2 match days.
Often at this time with Clinton Lancaster.
Yeah, who also ran away. But yeah,
Run
I think
away,
we also
the Monty Python sketch.
in our league previews for top 2 divisions, we have like a 30% success rate of getting the league right, but we do predict it all. I think I've put Glasgow City to win the league. I reckon Hibs are going to win the league because we just won 7-0, so right that high. But I think Glasgow City, and then the bottom 3 were Spartans, Dundee United, and Queen's Park. Dundee United rock bottom, but that was partly based on their position last season, and we also did our predictions, and then like the day after they announced 9 new players. But the bottom ones is hard because like you can see basically half the league going down. Like, I could see Aberdeen going down quite comfortably. I could see Motherwell going down, even if they have, even with the teams that have had good starts. I mean, I could see even part of Thistle getting accidentally dragged into it, because at the end of the day, it's not like you have to come that far, that far back. Montrose as well. Montrose will have their difficulties as well. So it's tough, but I do think that those 3 are the 3 that I'm looking at as like, I'm worried about you. and then Aberdeen are on the probably pushed themselves into that category now that they've not got a manager after 2 games and have conceded 18 goals. And against, I mean, we're not great. We've looked really good this season, but we're not like the best team ever. Aberdeen only managed 2 shots against us, so yeah, not great.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good at all. But there we go. Graham, just for you as well. What's your if you take your Glasgow City hat off and try and be neutral? Where do you think it's going to go? Not where you want it's going to go.
Yeah, I'm going to. I think it's going to be really interesting when City get Brenner back. Obviously, people who are not aware, Brenner Lavero was injured last November and had like 8 goals for us and looked like the striker we always needed. I believe she's one of the best strikers in the league when fully fit. It's going to take her time to come back. She had an Achilles injury, which kept her out for months. But she offers something different that we, in my opinion, don't have at the moment from a fan's perspective. And I do love every single one of those girls in that football club dearly, more than I let on even in this podcast. But I just feel Rangers might be the team that wins the league this season. But just to caveat it with more than gut feeling, I think what you have with Rangers is a really deep squad. Like the forward line, they have Scottish international Sarah Ewens, you could arguably say is 5th choice. Scottish international Kirsty Howard, who's always good for 15, 20 goals a season, even from the bench. Katie Wilkinson, who appears to just be trying to score 100 goals this season for some like unfair reason. On top of that, you've got Jane Ross. We all know who Jane Ross is. I don't need to explain who Jane Ross is. And on top of that as well, you've got Rio Hardy, who was like arguably their best, the highest goal scoring striker they had last season. That's just their forward line. The squad's just so deep. And what the squad has is a lot of winners in it. Nick Dock has now won a lot of stuff with Rangers. She's won a heck of a lot of stuff previously with Glasgow City. You've got a lot of players in that team that have won a league now. Yes, it's only one, but they have won a league. You know, not with Glasgow City, with Rangers. They've won cups with Rangers, numerous cups with Rangers. They understand what it takes to win. And I think they have the best youth that combines with that experience. And I also think physically they're the best side as well. People will disagree with me on that because Celtic are very physical. Celtic fans are going to hate me saying this. And I don't, this is just my opinion. Doesn't mean I'm right. I'm probably wrong. That's kind of the motto I have. I'm probably wrong. But I think if Rangers don't randomly like duff it like they did last season at the end, there was one game where, I mean, there was 2 games really where they could have gone ahead in points. One of them was the Celtic game where I think they hit the post and hit the bar twice. They were the better team. Celtic could say, well, yeah, hitting the bar is not scoring, and they were 100% right. And Celtic got the most goals and the most points last season to be able to win that league, where Rangers didn't. But I just think with the signings Rangers have brought in, the experience of like Nick Dock, Tessel Medag, Jane Ross through their spine, the amount of options they have combined with like Katie Wilkinson as a new signing, I just feel they're the strongest. But I will tip Celtic to win 1 cup and Glasgow City or Hibs to win the other.
Very good.
Just to,
well, there you go.
Oh, who's going down again? Oh God, you asked me that. I mean, Aberdeen's making a good early fist of it, aren't they? It's weird because like Aberdeen were really decent a few years ago, but they've kind of just fell off. And I don't think managers changing weekly, no matter what reason that would be for. I think Colin Bell said he's left for personal reasons. I don't know those, but either way, no matter what he's left for, that's 2 managers in a month or something. Like that doesn't help. Dundee have the experience of staying up last season in the playoff, but I think it's going to be tough for them. It's hard to attract players to that area over Glasgow and over like Edinburgh and stuff, where like Spartans and whatnot can attract them. And I'd really like to see Queen's Park stay up, but that's going to be tough. It's tough for any team coming up to build and then get out of a relegation zone that now has 3 teams in, which I hope they do it because Queen's Park is, the men's team at least, is there right behind me. But I think I think Rangers to win the league, Celtic will win a cup, City will win a cup, or Hibs potentially, probably beating Glasgow City, not my luck. And Queen's Park, Aberdeen, Dundee United to go down. Sorry, Aberdeen.
Well, no, it's all right. I'm over it. It's not a problem. Laura, I suppose for you, I'm just going to ask you a very simple question to finish off, which is there anything you want to add? Is there anything you researched that you particularly wanted to put out there? Perhaps you've got a shout for the title from what you've seen.
Not particularly. I think we've covered all my research, sadly, but yeah, I think for me, I'll be reading Matt's article about who to support. My girlfriend's family is Scottish, so I need to consult them probably. I know her mum's from Glasgow, so I should probably do a bit of research around that and start picking a team, because it's certainly a league that I want to follow now. And yeah,
I've
just found
actually-
it absolutely fascinating.
I've read my article and it says it just literally, it's just like one line. It says support Glasgow City apparently.
I actually would retire in shame if I'd written an article that said just support Glasgow City. I almost didn't include them, just out of spite.
Well, genuinely, boys, this has been one of my favourite shows that we have done since the channel began in January. And to get a message like this from Alan just a little bit earlier, as a Scotsman living in England, I found this evening show fascinating. I've loved it. It's been almost an hour and a half. And sorry, not sorry, I've genuinely enjoyed every single bit of information that you have parted down upon us. Graham, if people wanted to find more from you, number one, whereabouts could they go for that? And number two, just remind everybody where they can find that Glasgow City documentary that you were talking about.
Yeah, it's on, I think it's on BBC iPlayer at the moment. It's by BBC Alba, so a lot of it's in Gaelic. I'm English. I don't know. I do have the subtitles on. But obviously Laura, Cass, and a lot of the players and a lot of the moments are in English, so it's in the subtitles. It's not hard to understand. It's a really good documentary, whether you decide to support City or decide to support Hibs or Rangers or whoever it may be. It's worth watching because it gives a good insight to the history of not just the club but maybe the league as well, and how it kind of came to be where it's at nowish. And if you want to read my men's and women's stuff, I'm not doing as much women's stuff as I would like and as I used to, but I'm hoping that will change at some point. Just at Graham Falk on Twitter. Like, I'd like to tell you that I'm not that often on Twitter, but Matt will attest I'm on Twitter far too much. I don't want to be, because it gives Elon Musk money. Don't want to do that, but here we are.
There you go. Brilliant stuff. Well, thank you. And Matt as well. You talk about How's Your Touch, which I presume is what you've been talking about in terms of finding the article that you were talking about. Also, as well, the article that's coming out tomorrow. And I didn't get the chance to say this as well, but obviously we all hope that Courtney Stewart's doing well and that she goes on to fully recover and finds herself back kicking the ball around sooner rather than later. But where can people find your work, Matt?
So we are at How's Your Touch _ on Twitter and Instagram, and then How's Your Touch on Substack is where all our articles live. So we do fairly regular articles. We've got obviously quite a long backlog now, 100-something articles, with ranging from what SWPL club you should support to what's going on in the island games to what it's like being a goalie sat on the bench. So even if you're not a SWPL fan, there's stuff there you might find interesting, just generally women's football wise. And I'm at the Matt RD on Twitter.
No, absolutely. And listen, if we've managed, I say we as if I've done anything other than ask questions, if these guys have managed to inspire you slightly into getting into the SWPL, you can do so even here in jolly old Blighty, because the BBC seems to have fairly regular women's football matches from Scotland coming on live on the BBC. In fact, there's going to be one on Wednesday the 21st, which is the next one coming up, Celtic women against Motherwell women, and that is on BBC iPlayer, the BBC Sport website, and BBC Alba. I'm not really a big fan of shouting out channels as such there, but certainly if it means you're going to get a little bit more football in your life, that's the place to go. Boys, honestly, thank you so much. It's I've really, really, really enjoyed this evening. I'm fangirling a little bit actually about just how knowledgeable you two are. So well done. Thank you very much. Brilliant for those of you that have been in the chat as well. Thank you for watching. Laura, anything to add? Beautiful. We shall say our goodbyes. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week.